Hello, friends. Welcome to No Cap Room, the Yahoo Sports NBA podcast that sounds a little bit different and, dare I say, quite a bit sexier. Right off the top this week, my name is Dan Devine. I am a senior NBA writer for Yahoo Sports. My partner, Jake Fischer, is out this week on a well-deserved vacation, which means two things. I slide over into the first chair, which I got to say, it's much cozier in here. I'm going to be doing my Brian Windhorst points in no time at all. And it also means I need somebody else to talk to. And that means welcoming in a truly esteemed and illustrious guest. We're lucky enough to be joined today by someone who's not only NBA podcasting royalty, I said it, and I mean it, I'm sticking with it, but also a returning champion here within these purple painted walls at Yahoo Sports. He is the co-host of the No Dunks podcast on the Athletic Network, and once upon a time, he was the editor of a little basketball blog called Ball Don't Lie, which made him the first person to ever professionally publish basketball writing by some scrub named Dan Devine. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only J.E. Skeets. Welcome to No Cap Room, sir.
Wow. Thank you for the intro. Dan, good to see you. Give you a virtual hug because we always hug when we see each other.
That's right.
Yeah, a little reunion here. Though I don't remember us actually podcasting much back in the Skeets Ball Don't Lie days, but I'm happy to be here.
There was the podcast at that point. It was you and it was Tass Mellis and super producer JD.
That's right.
Tass, who last I saw him at the finals, who's we gave again big hug as we always do. And Tass said to me, "Oh, I know you're in the middle of writing. I don't want to bother you." I was like, "Tass Mellis, you have been here from the beginning for me. You could never bother me." I'm sure you bother Skeets a little bit more though. You've done like 3,000 shows with him. Sure. But yes. Skeets, again, first editor I ever had at Ball Don't Lie, one of the legends, jersey up in the rafters here at Yahoo Sports. We have him here today, not only so that I can blame him and everybody can he can take full responsibility for me and everything I've inflicted on the basketball internet from the years from there on, but it's because while J.E. Skeets calls Atlanta home now, he hails from the north. He's from the north of the border. And he's going to help me take a deep dive into the state of affairs surrounding a curious club in Toronto. J.E. Skeets, you're going to give me some Raptor news today.
Yeah, this will be fun. I want to say right now, I will not be answering for all Raptors fans out there, but I'll be giving my opinion on the state of the franchise and this interesting offseason and moving into the next season, because there's sort of a lot to talk about with this very weird Toronto Raptors team. Well,
that was the big thing. It was kind of breaking my brain trying to figure out what was going on with them. So I said, let me take the opportunity while I've got the chair and the mic to find somebody to help me try to figure it all out. So we will get there. But first, there's not a ton of news in the NBA world.
No, there's not.
Of August. But we'll go. We are a weekly show, so we will go with the quick update on the Damian Lillard situation. I know you guys talked about it on No Dunks on your daily. On Friday, the NBA sent a memo to all 30 teams reminding them that any player or agent who says, either publicly or privately, that a player won't fully perform the services called for under his player contract in the event of a trade is subject to discipline by the league. The reason for that memo is a reminder pointed at Damian Lillard and his agent, Aaron Goodwin, who has reportedly been informing teams that any team that trades for Dame Lillard will be dealing with an unhappy Dame, unless, of course, that team is the Miami Heat, the only team he wants to go to. From Tim Bontemps at ESPN, quote, the NBA said in the memo that Goodwin denied stating or indicating to any team that Lillard would refuse to play for them. It went on to say that the relevant teams provided descriptions of their communication with Goodwin that was mostly, though not entirely, consistent with Goodwin's statements to us. You want to make sure that you've got that mostly, though not entirely in there. Important to note the distinctions. Lillard and Goodwin told the NBA that he would fulfill his contract regardless of where he was traded. Maybe that's where the, mostly but not entirely, because that is definitely not what Aaron Goodwin has been telling multiple outlets over the course of the last month here. Mm-hmm. Ballpark, what do you see as the outcome of this? What do you make of the memo? Do you think it meaningfully changes any of the facts on the ground?
Not really. I think it's just a friendly reminder to all the agents out there. Let's not lean too heavily into my client will only play for one team or two teams. Make it more wants to be traded to the contender, wants to be traded to a team that can compete for a championship immediately. That type of vibe. I don't think this changes anything. I'm on record on No Dunks earlier this week saying I think this trade happens quite soon. My gut says. I just feel like, it's sort of kicking back up. We got the memo, and I ultimately think Damian Lillard is going to still find his way to the Miami Heat. So this memo was a couple other owners probably pissed off and saying, hey, we tried to make a trade request maybe for Damian Lillard, and they are telling us don't do it. Just don't. Save yourself the embarrassment. And that's really all this is, I think.
Yeah, there's is sort of a line to draw between this and the, I don't know, like the flopping penalties or tampering fines or whatever. It's like plausible deniability. You need a fig leaf here. You need the list of, there's 5 teams he said he preferred to go to, and all of them, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. That's the one. That's where he really wants to go. So as long as you can pitch that or say, well, he's going to do his best to make this work the best he can for the organization, then, all of this goes away. But when, and it's like the double-edged sword of the flip side of Dame being like, I want to do business straight. I want to be an honorable guy. I want to let you know, I want to go there. Get me there. It's like, all right, but like, you can't just say that, man. You gotta give us some wiggle room here to move around.
Yeah, I mean, Damian is not saying it, right? That's why you have an agent to do all this. Right. And, hence Aaron Goodwin's name popping up left and right here. And he's going to bat for his guy because that's what you do as an agent, or should do. But yeah, it's just, again, a bit of a friendly reminder from the league, the optics of it all. Come on. We all know what's going on here. You're not the first superstar to want to go to a particular place or two. And you will not be the last, but just let's not be so blatant about it if you can avoid that. And that's I think, again, what this memo sort of all was. And I think, we've heard Shams recently sort of going through the potential draft picks that the Heat are now willing to offer. It's like getting up as high as 3 or 4 now. You obviously got to get some contracts coming back to make the money work. Is it a young player or two? Jaime Jaquez Jr. is now eligible to be traded because he signed sort of back when Lillard made the trade request and 30 days had to pass, but he could potentially be dealt now. So I think this happens sooner rather than later, mainly because Murphy's Law says when everybody starts to take off and take their vacation time, that's when it will go down. So that's also a part of the play.
Yeah, it's when you're on a beach with a drink in your hand that all of a sudden you get a text saying, all right, we need you to do something. And to that point about what Shams Charania at The Athletic has reported, the Heat, quote, have been preparing a trade package for Dame, and the rundown on that, 3 to 4 first-round picks, which, just for the bookkeeping purposes, the Heat owe Oklahoma City a lottery-protected 2025 first that, if it doesn't convey, it becomes unprotected in 2026. But beyond that, they have their own first to play with. They could also negotiate with the Thunder, find a way to remove that protection, give Oklahoma something else that they want, Oklahoma City something else rather that they want. Pick swaps, we love a pick swap. It introduces all sort of optionality and flexibility into the proceedings. Just ask Phoenix about how they turned pick swaps into a whole bunch of stuff. Second rounders, though the Heat don't have a whole lot of those. And then, as you mentioned, young player Jaime Jaquez Jr. Now on the board. Nikola Jovic, last year's first round pick, also could be part of that mix. And then the sort of major, or the unknown variable in all of that is, what can the Heat turn Tyler Hero into? That, of course, has been an ongoing question for feels like 8 to 10 months at this point, basically since he put pen to paper on the deal to extend the contract. And then it was like, well, is that going to make him more exciting or less exciting for Utah in a Donovan Mitchell package? And then, we sort of find ourselves in a holding pattern there. So all that to say, we wound up with several minutes of discussion of news that wasn't actually news. So I know you do the Is This News segment on your show, but we come to a point where at least we got a lot of words out of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Hey, you and I, if we're going to do anything, we're going to give you a lot of words on something that doesn't probably require it. I just think it's interesting. We're at this point. You're right. The Tyler Hero aspect of it all. Is he being rerouted to a third team? Who's the third team? And what is the exchange, in theory, then going to the Blazers? Is it just another first round pick? Is that why Shams is getting us to 4? Because in this hypothetical, there's a pick there from this third team. And who is, again, that third team? But if you look at the deal, let's say, hypothetically, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson for contract reasons. Let's get crazy and go Jovic and Jaquez Jr. 3 first-round picks, a couple pick swaps, and a handful of second-round picks. How does that sound? It doesn't sound bad. It doesn't sound brutal, but I think what a lot of Blazers fans will say is, hold on. We don't want Hero because of positional redundancy. And that means then, who is the real player, the blue chip that we're getting back? Because, the Pels get Ingram for AD. The Nets get Mikal Bridges for KD. Even the Jazz getting Lauri Markkanen, let's say, from the Cavs for Donovan Mitchell. Thunder getting SGA for Paul George back in the day. It's like, who is that in this hypothetical? I think that's the holdup, right? For at least maybe Joe Cronin and the Blazers and definitely Blazers fans. But it just may not be out there, I think, is what we get to ultimately, unless this third team magically has that blue chip that they want to swap for Tyler Hero. And then you're like, why would they do that? That's the holdup to me.
Yeah, and so then you wind up in sort of with the two remaining roadblocks there is if you were the Blazers, if you're Joe Cronin, you're saying, well, if we don't have that coming from someplace, if we don't find the third team as the way station that gets us either the blue chip player that we want or enough stuff to turn into that player elsewhere, what is our motivation to get off of Dame, considering we've got him on the books through 2027? And we just had the memo, but is he not going to play on a $46 million contract next year? It doesn't seem altogether likely. Mm-hmm. And so then you wind up, so that's one sort of rock meeting the hard place of what ESPN's Brian Windhorst had reported on television, I believe, or it was earlier this week, which was that he's in his reporting says, quote, I can't identify a team that's making a serious offer for Dame Lillard at this point. And my belief is that the Heat can't either. So if Portland is saying you don't have enough to give us what we want, even if that deal doesn't sound bad on its face, and then the Heat are saying, okay, then show us your better offer, it's the recipe for a stalemate and just the recipe for this going. You're right. I mean, if Portland looks at it and says, it's not coming, we're not finding that, let's move on with our business, then it could happen as soon as tomorrow. But if they look at it and say, there's no reason for us to do it today if we don't like this price, maybe as we enter training camp, something else materially changes around the league, and that creates a condition where someone gets desperate and then put something in the middle. But that's it's a dangerous game, a sort of chicken or a staring contest to play over the next few weeks with your signature superstar and with a fan base that's going to be like, come on, let's just not the Blazers fans are looking to get it over with, but at a certain point, things get to be sort of more stale and toxic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, you're going in with a rejuvenated, Scoot Henderson as your sort of guy that you want to start building around, and Sharp and all that, like the youth movement there. And you don't want to sour it from the start if there is this weird Damian Lillard cloud still hanging around the team come spring training time. That's why I think it's like trying to even find another team right now during the offseason that are close enough to a title, that have enough pieces to make a move, an aggressive package for Damian Lillard. It's like you really struggle to find it. And that's probably why the Heat haven't given their best offer in terms of a Lillard deal, because they see that too. And they're like, well, why would we include Jovic and Jaquez Jr. or, this many amount of picks? It's like, well, who are we actually competing with? Sounds like no one. But they're in a funny spot too, because the moves they've made and the players they've lost, it's like, we almost all expect Lillard to be there. I'm on record here saying it. I'm on my own podcast saying it. And it's like, they don't look like that great a team if Lillard doesn't find his way there. It's like, at least they look worse than they were in that championship or finals run, excuse me. So yeah, but it's like, it feels like it will happen. It's just a matter of time. And I guess ultimately how many picks and how many young players and all of that stuff.
Speaking of matters of time, we go to the Western Coast. We go to Los Angeles, California, where Los Angeles Lakers owner Jeanie Buss says she knows that LeBron James is not ready to retire yet. Spoiler alert, he announced that at the ESPYs, shocking a nation full of people who expected that he was about to retire. But she's already decided the Lakers are going to retire his jersey. Interview with Sportskeeda, she said that his status as an all-time great makes the jersey retirement a foregone conclusion. Quote, the standard for having your jersey retired as a Laker is when a player is inducted into the Hall of Fame. I have absolutely no doubt that LeBron will make it into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Pretty out, thin limb to be out on there.
Yep.
When he does so, then we will retire his jersey. He will have his Lakers jersey retired, no doubt about it. So this would put him in line, because you figure brings the championship to Cleveland, right? Going to happen there. Brings the championship to Miami. Going to happen there.
Yep.
This would put him in line to have his jersey retired by 3 franchises. Do you know the only other player who has had his jersey retired by 3?
Yeah, it's got to be Wilt Chamberlain with the Warriors, 76ers, and Lakers, all number 13, I believe. The same number, yeah.
This is what I get for having a sicko on the podcast. Yeah, all right, yes, you're absolutely right. Although, as luck would have it now, that the late, great Bill Russell has had his number 6 retired by all teams, he even gets Wilt there.
True.
that sort of eternal competition. Now Bill Russell's up everywhere and looking at Wilt saying like, come on, you couldn't even beat me on this. The other question that I had on this, though, because we don't want to make too much of a meal out of this one, is LeBron wore 23 when they wore the title in the bubble. Mm-hmm. He wore 6 when he broke the scoring record to become the all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Are we now in line for him to join Kobe Bryant as having 2 numbers retired by the Lakers? Or does that feel like the kind of thing that might result in an uproar and riots in the streets from Kobe fans?
Yeah. Wow, I hadn't even thought about it, the Kobe angle of it all. Sure, they probably would not be all that happy with it. I also think the complication is the number 6, like you just said with the Bill Russell part. It's like, I guess my gut says it would just retire number 23 with the Lakers, and especially because that was the championship. My only other thing off of this is, does that mean Anthony Davis is going to have his jersey retired by the Lakers too? I mean, this is what sort of Jeanie said. You got to assume he's going into the Hall of Fame. He won a title with the Lakers. Is that like a lock?
And this is, I'll betray my own biases here. When you say, I got to imagine AD's going into the Hall of Fame, like my first result is kind of like, really? Are we sure? Right. Are we sure? But I'm sure, you go and maybe this is an August project, right? Right. In the slop of a sicko summer, look and say like, what's Anthony Davis's Hall of Fame likelihood? But yeah, you figured, the All NBA teams that he's made, the stats that he accumulated during his years in New Orleans, like he'll probably hit those statistical benchmarks. Gold medal with Team USA, all that kind of stuff. Like you stack up the resume and say like, oh yeah, maybe he does. Maybe that is a lock. But then that feels like a complimentary kind of thing. But then again, we've also saw Pau Gasol got his jersey retired by the Lakers as well, right? So now that's multiple championships, but still, there's maybe a precedent and a pathway there. But yeah, it does feel a little weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and she's saying, you get your jersey retired when you go into the Hall of Fame, and I think, the part of it is winning a championship too, and he was an instrumental part. I mean, if we're being honest, in the bubble title. So yeah, I think AD is going to make the Hall of Fame, I think, when it's all said and done, and I guess Jeanie Buss is going to have to put his number up there. So there you go. So congrats to him as well.
Premature congrats to him. Make some space up in the rafters of insert arena name here arena. Because I don't think we're going to stick with crypto.com that much longer. You don't think it will be? No. Yeah, that's my, she's prematurely predicting this. I'm prematurely predicting we're going to find a new naming rights sponsor for the LA arena.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I will say, when you said Wilt was the only guy to have his jersey retired 3 times by 3 different teams, Pete Maravich has a weird thing too, where he's retired by the Hawks, number 44, by the Utah Jazz, number 7, though he played a lot of that time in New Orleans. And I think the Pelicans, as a franchise, also retired number 7, even though, of course, he never played for the actual Pelicans. He was the New Orleans Jazz. So he's one of those weird ones, too. It's like, it's sort of like Jordan's number being retired by the Miami Heat. He, of course, never played for them, but there you go. So I just wanted to show Pistol Pete some love there, too.
Appreciate that. I mean, he joins Dan Marino as someone with a sort of a more civic institution kind of jersey retirement in an NBA arena. Consider this my beginning of my stump case for J.R. Smith getting into the Hall of Fame so that his jersey can be retired, since he was a Laker on that team. And I mean, if nothing else, certainly a blog era Hall of Famer, J.R. Smith. If nothing else, maybe we can get him into like the contributors wing or something like that. Shirtless J.R. on a plaque. Who could beat it?
That'd be so good. Yes, there's been I feel like Zach Lowe has been always pushing for like a meme wing or something like that, or just like players that like would no doubt not make the Hall of Fame because of their accolades and their just counting stats, but for whatever all these other reasons, like J.R. Smith would be absolutely a lock for something like that. I love that idea.
This was like our former colleague, Kelly Dwyer, used to argue for Jamal Crawford being in the All-Star game every year as sort of like an all-time quarterback, just because like he would be super fun to have in that game.
It's right. It's like, this is the silliest exhibition game put on a show. Get players like, Jamal Crawford in there. That's what he does in the NBA, for crying out loud. You imagine what he does in an All-Star game. I love that.
All right. Well, we're going to move from that. We're going to take a quick break and come back. And then, Skeets, it'll be time for you to give me some Raptors news. Welcome back to No Cap Room. We are joined here by J.E. Skeets of the No Dunks podcast on the Athletic Network. We're now going to turn our attention to the Toronto Raptors. We'll go sort of table setting where we left off and where we find them now. 41-41 record last season, 12th in offensive efficiency, 14th in defensive efficiency, according to Cleaning the Glass. Dismal shooting team for most of the season, but did find sort of an uptick after the trade deadline. They bring back Jakob Poeltl. They go 15-11 after the deadline, outscore opponents by about 3 points per 100, top 10 net rating. Looked a little bit more like the Raptors team we were familiar with, playing to that identity that had been successful for them. Pound the offensive glass, force a ton of turnovers, go bananas in transition, don't turn it over yourself. The Poeltl the Poeltl trade, sent out a first-round pick to get him back from San Antonio, was a big boon for them. They were almost 9 points per 100 better with him on the floor, but most of that came with Fred VanVleet on the floor, and that's where we begin to pivot to this offseason. Out, Nick Nurse, longtime head coach. Fred VanVleet, standard-bearing point guard on his way to Houston. Delano Banton, fun guy, but now going to be playing in Boston. In Darko Rajakovic comes from Memphis, off the Memphis bench to take the head coaching reins from Nick Nurse. Grady Dick in his sequined suit, the first-round draft pick. Dennis Schroeder comes in to take the reins from Fred VanVleet. And then depth pieces. Jalen McDaniels, who I think I had tweeted at one point, like, he seems like the most Raptors-y guy to never be on the Raptors. And then, of course, they go get him after Nurse goes, which is funny in and of itself, from the 76ers, where Nick Nurse went, because the circle of life in these things is sort of small and tight. Garrett Temple, preeminent veteran, comes to join the end of the bench. You know, some fun, interesting guys like Marquise Noel and Javon Freeman, Liberty on two ways. Gary Trent Jr. is back, opting into his deal. Jakob Poeltl, as we mentioned, back on a 4-year, $80 million contract. Still here, perhaps surprisingly, ? Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. When I was tasked with doing the winners and losers of the offseason, I wrote that these Toronto Raptors were among the bigger losers of the offseason, primarily because Fred VanVleet goes out to Houston. You kind of don't really replace him with anybody. Can you make for me a glass half full case for where the Raptors find themselves after this offseason, why the arrow would be pointing up as opposed to pointing down towards the bottom of the standings?
Okay, I'm trying to make, like you said, the glass half full case for the Raptors here. Let's start with the new coach in Darko Rajakovic. New coach, new vibes. You got to start there, because all you heard about the Raptors last season was the vibes were off. And that, to me, means, you know, there was conflict between players, between the coaches, maybe even management, directions, what's going on here. They did make the Poeltl move, like you said, at the deadline. That helped them out. But just getting rid of that and just bringing in, by all accounts, this super energetic, imaginative, fun, new European head coach, that could really help, because I do think there was this case of, especially with VanVleet and maybe Siakam to some extent, but like these guys that had won the championship, been around the block, were a little bit more of the vets of the teams, with then the sort of youth movement that maybe there was a bit of butting of heads, and just in terms of, I don't know, approach to the game or the results that were happening. Because when I was at All-Star Weekend, this past season in Salt Lake City, talking to people really plugged in with the Raptors, that's all they kept saying was like, oh, it's just brutal vibes. Like, no one's happy. No one's having fun. Everyone's just in this funk. You know, Scotty Barnes obviously hadn't progressed a lot in that second year, in his sophomore year, from his Rookie of the Year season. And everyone was telling me then, Nurse is probably gone. Like, he's getting a bit of the blame for this. So that's the first one. The Poeltl part, you already sort of made the case for me, but they were a much better team when he came over. You know, you said 15-11. That's like, what, just under 60% win clip. You take that through an 82-game season, okay, you're like a 50-win club. And that's where I think a lot of people expect the Raptors to be closer to a 50-win team than a 41-41 team. So there's that as well. And then just the idea of, like, Gary Trent Jr. staying there, that surprised a lot of people, him opting in. And a little bit more youth in Grady Dick and obviously Jalen McDaniels. This idea that they can sort of pair better with Scotty Barnes as the point guard. And that's the final piece here. I mean, I think they're going to lean into Scotty Barnes point guard. They're going to try it. And I'm excited to see if it works. Sometimes I get a little concerned at other times. Like, is he ready for that in year 3? But that's sort of the quote unquote VanVleet replacement. It's going to be Barnes and Siakam really are their 2-point forwards. And I think that's what they're going to hang their hat on. And they just have to get better defensively. They need an identity. The biggest thing with the Raptors, they had no identity last year. What are you? What your identity was? You're a crappy shooting team, and that's not a great identity. So it's got to be that, I think, like back to that defensive identity that's going to win you a lot of games. And with like all the switchability and all the height, length on this squad, they should be. So that's, I guess, a half-hearted glass half full case there.
All right. Now, having done that, how do you actually feel about what all just transpired?
Yeah, not okay. I would not have felt great, if I'm being honest, and I'm happy for him, but giving VanVleet that sort of money that he got from the Rockets.
It's a giant deal. 3 years, 128 and a half, only 2 guaranteed, but giant deal.
Giant deal. Only 2 guaranteed. That was a nice like little move there from the Rockets, but that is a lot of money for a guy that I do believe has probably hit his ceiling, which is really good. I mean, he had an all-star season. I think he struggled last year a little bit. Again, I think a part of that was the vibes of this squad and sort of who was taking the shots and where the offense was running through. So, the shot suffered. So I'm fine with that. I actually am. I sort of like the direction of either going and finding another point guard eventually. I don't think Schroeder's obviously the long-term answer here, but hopefully it's Scotty Barnes. So I like that. But yeah, overall, we've also had a bunch of Siakam trade rumors. And, that's tough. I mean, he's an incredible player. He's probably underrated by a lot of people. I don't think they're watching a ton of Raptors games. They see his numbers. They see the All-Star selections, couple All-NBA selections. But he's probably even better than a lot of people think. But maybe not a number one guy. So I'm torn. I can see. I'm excited about a new coach and hopefully a new identity. I'm willing to give it a go here, and hopefully they start the season better than they did last year.
Right. I think that's a huge point. Like if you are behind the 8 ball by the time you get to like Thanksgiving, then it already feels like, oh man, like what,
Yes.
This initial plan of put the ball in Scotty Barnes' hands, let him create. Let's see how we can be creative around him. If that gets off to a rocky start, then it could make for another long season, and the vibes could again be pretty sour. But Barnes is one of the more interesting players in the league to me. I was Cavs fans, earmuff it for me. I was one of the people who voted for him for Rookie of the Year a couple of years back because I thought that it was sort of notable and remarkable that he was contributing to winning in such a significant way so early on both ends of the ball. Mm-hmm. And then that seemed to somewhat stagnate last season. And that happens to tons of guys, right? Sophomore slump, rookie, you hit the rookie wall. It's like teams now have tape on you. They know how to drop off of you and let you say, all right, if you're going to beat me from outside, then do it. But I'm not going to let you just sort of herky jerk elbow your way into like a 10-foot floater. And that gave Scotty Barnes a lot of trouble. He did get better at dealing with those sorts of coverages as the year went on. I'm wondering, as we go into year 3, and obviously the organization is putting the sort of the thrust of its support behind him. What's something you're excited to see from him, you hope to see from him, and what's something that, maybe gives you a little bit of pause about that bigger role for him?
Yeah, well, you would hope to see the shot a little bit better than it was last year. I think he was 29% from 3 and 47% from the field. Like almost that number scares me more. Like that's got to be higher for a guy of his size. Like he is a big dude. Right. And you just want that. I mean, you want to be that comfortably over 50%, I would think. And like then flirting with like the 33, 34, 35% from deep. Now you're laughing because you've got to like respect the shot a little bit. Either he's added something sort of in the post because of his size or in the little mid-range there and just getting more comfortable shooting the 3 because all the other stuff he can do really well. Playmaking sort of, it's sort of, no one's going to want to hear this because it's a name nobody wants to be compared to, but there's a lot of Ben Simmons qualities to Scotty Barnes. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously 3-time All-Star Ben Simmons, not, before the back injuries and before the holdouts and before whether or not we even, can figure out if he likes basketball. A lot of comparisons, like a lot of strong comparisons, but can he be more of an offensive sort of, contributor? You would hope so, or at least the Raptors are hoping so. So I'm hopeful that he's going to be given the keys. And I think a guy like him sort of needs that. And that's where like a VanVleet can almost get in the way. And that's where somewhere like Nurse is going to be like, I can't just hand this to a sophomore guy here and say, go run this, offense. Darko might be more willing to do that. How long that leash will be fascinating to see. Like you said, Dan, what if he comes in and he's the point guard on opening night and he struggles with it for 6 weeks? Do you like double down and say, no, we gotta see this through. We think there's potential there. We think he can be this giant, sort of Magic Johnson-like guy. We gotta keep going with it, or do you panic and say, we really gotta get a point guard in here, or like suddenly they're starting Dennis Schroeder for crying out loud. Like, who knows? We'll see. My biggest concern is you want your point guard usually to be your leader. And,
right.
You're asking a lot for a young guy, like in year 3, just to be a leader of a team that a lot of people still hope to be at least a playoff team, if not flirting with sort of like home court advantage. So that's pretty vital to Toronto's success. Like, can he sort of like become that floor general, both on the floor and sort of, I think, in the locker room, or at least starting to gain his voice in the league. So I guess like that gives me pause. And then he's also a great defender, but like if he's our point guard, like he's taking all of these super athletic guards on the other side. Like, who's guarding these guys? I know there's a lot of switching and all that, but like it's not going to be Gary Trent Jr. It's going to be him or OG, I guess. But I mean, I get it. They have the length, they have the size, they are pretty good defenders, but it's like, holy moly, like we're talking about the most athletic guys in the league at that position. And that's, a tough ask to bring it defensively for 35 to 40 minutes a game. So that gives me some pause too, but hopefully it's more of a team defense.
Right. But yeah, you're absolutely, then all of those things connect, right? So you're increasing the responsibility and workload on the defensive end. You're dramatically increasing the responsibility and workload on the offensive end, and saying like, our number one failing last season outside of outside shooting was our vibes, was the way that this team felt and the energy surrounding it. You're now responsible for that, especially in the absence of Fred VanVleet, right? Who has been the guy who's sort of like the steward of the franchise, took the baton from Lowry in that way. That's a huge, huge like increase in just overall responsibility for a guy who, was 21 years old last year. But this is why I think it's indicative of how much faith Masai Ujiri has in Scotty Barnes, why he, felt so strongly. I mean, it's maybe a little bit difficult to remember now. That was like a controversial draft pick a couple of years ago. Everybody expected it was going to be Jalen Suggs out of Gonzaga, and Barnes goes, and it's kind of like, whoa, it seemed like it made perfect sense for them to go for this guard. And they said, well, we think this guy is that guard. It's just going to take some reimagining. And the reimagining is something that Masai Ujiri's been it's been sort of a calling card and a hallmark of his reign, and this blew my mind when I was looking all this stuff up. We just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of Masai Ujiri taking over the Toronto Raptors. Wow. It was the end of May 2013. I know it's been a lot of blog posts and podcast episodes ago. I think you have to consider that tenure a success by pretty much any metric there is. Second highest regular season winning percentage in the NBA since he took over, behind only the Warriors. 8 playoff trips in 10 seasons, tied for the 5th most playoff wins in that time, have won 9 series. Of course, the first NBA championship in franchise history. And I think that level of sustained success sort of put him in a position where we've seen him as sort of like having a Midas touch, right? Like especially when it comes to building and refurbishing the roster, like has found so much talent outside of where you would traditionally expect to find it, like guys outside the high lottery, Siakam at 27, OG at 23, making these picks like the trades rather. Like the one that always sticks in my brain is the flipping Gravis Vasquez to the Bucks for the picks that became OG Anunoby and Norman Powell in the same draft. And it's like, all right, did pretty good business there. Even if I think the initial idea with Gravis Vasquez was he's going to be the guy to get KD to Toronto because they were tight. I think that one didn't wind up working out. But Kawhi gets there, it works out pretty well eventually. And you like OG and Norman Powell. But this guy, so he finds great players outside the lottery. He nails his trades. He has the stones to go all in on Kawhi to make that deal. He becomes one of the most in-demand execs in the league. Every time there's an opening, it's like, are they going to back up the Brinks truck for Masai? He gets that and gets the keys to the kingdom to stay in Toronto. And he becomes one of these like major power brokers. And then the last few years kind of happen, right? Yeah. And I kind of wonder what is Masai Ujiri now? Like, where is he? What is how do we see him? How do we think about him? Because I think one of the knocks we're getting now is you found these guys, and maybe you kind of are clinging a little too tight to him in a way that might not necessarily be the most beneficial for the next iteration of the franchise. Like, is it a guy who had his run and kind of figured it all out and doesn't want to let it go? Or is there maybe a new renaissance on the way for him? How do you think where is he in the league at large right now?
Well, yeah, it's a loaded question because there's no doubt. I would say at some point it felt like 99% of the Raptors fan base was in Masai we trust. Those were the 4 words you said. It was like you said, he had the Midas touch. Everything he did somehow worked out. He looked brilliant. He is brilliant. And I mean, he even did stuff obviously back in his Nuggets days where like the reason he got the opportunity in Toronto as sort of the head honcho.
Listen, I'm wearing a Knicks shirt. You don't got to remind me, boss.
Right, exactly. So he was one of the best, and he probably is still one of the best. But Raptors fans recently have been like, yeah, what's going on here? Again, it goes back to this identity. And then the other buzzword, obviously, is direction. And he really is not afraid to, like, you think they should go this way? And he goes, no, I'll go the exact opposite way. And again, it's worked out. I mean, obviously, trading DeRozan was a huge move in the franchise's history. I mean, a beloved Raptors legend. And obviously, he sees enough and he goes, we're never going to win with these two guys, Lowry and DeRozan. We got to do something. That was huge. Firing Casey was pretty big even, obviously, at that point, with Coach of the Year and stuff like that, and going with Nick Nurse. Everybody's like, who is Nick Nurse? Like, are you kidding me? Like, no one even heard of this guy for the most part. So he's made all these moves where you're like, whoa, that's pretty ballsy, and it had worked out. But recently, these last couple of years, they're just in the worst spot. The Raptors are in the worst spot. They are. They're like, we went through their roster. There's talented players, so that means they're not going to be one of the worst teams, but then they're not living up to like a 50-win, 60-win team where they're, you know, you're putting them, penciling them in, putting them in pen to win playoff series because they're just in between. And so now the Raptors fan base is like, well, come on, man, like lean into Barnes, but lean into the youth movement and stop letting all these guys go for nothing, because Van Vliet, just another example of a guy basically going for nothing. I mean, Lowry was a sign and trade, but not a whole lot coming back for him. We've seen a bunch of the, obviously the championship pieces leaving for nothing as well. So people are frustrated with that. It's like Siakam is entering the final year of his deal here, and it would be very, very bad if in the end he leaves for nothing. I mean, that would just be brutal. And that's why people are saying trade him now, get some sort of package, get some draft picks, and get to work. You've proven you're a great, evaluator of talent. Do it again, and you could be, back to a good team in 2 or 3 years, because you can sort of rebuild quickly in this league if you hit the right player, obviously in a draft or two. So I do still, I guess, go with the motto of in Masai we trust, because I think we all panic as fans. We say, we had a 3-game losing streak, blow it up, move off of it, we're done, and he seems so like, chill out, relax. He's playing, I feel like he's almost playing a different game at times. Like he's playing a very, very long game, but that can get frustrating when there's a 3 window now example of just a mediocre team. And again, that's the worst spot to ever be in the league. Fan bases would rather have just like a 20-win team that has a bunch of fun and young, exciting guys where 1 or 2 might pop off than being like, well, we're going to lose in the play-in or lose in the first round. It's like, you're just going through the motions then. It drives people's nuts. So I like Masai still, but yeah, he's in this is like the biggest question, I think, of his sort of Raptors tenure here, of like what he does now, mainly with Siakam and OG and where they go.
It's funny because for so long, the sort of the curveball take on Masai was like, he's been waiting to be able to build a team in his own image for years, and they've just been too good for him to do it, right? Like he gets the job, and like right away he's trading off on Andrea Bargnani and Rudy Gay, and like, all right, you get Lowry there, and then like you stumble into a good team that stays good for a decade. Yeah. And it's like, well, now is your time to rebuild. You got the number 4 pick, the first high lottery pick you've gotten. You got Barnes. He was a hit. This is the time to do it. And you go like, yeah, but I don't want to get rid of those guys. Those guys are awesome. And also I found all those guys and we developed all those guys. And Pascal Siakam is, like you can see in a vacuum why you wouldn't want to move any or all those guys. I actually wrote, I think when I was back at the Ringer, like the argument for not trading Lowry at that deadline was like, you don't just need to get rid of this guy that was like so instrumental and vital to your franchise kind of for nothing. Like you're not like getting nothing from continuing to employ this guy that means so much. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, like all of these guys, or the remaining ones at least, and specifically in this point, Siakam and OG Anunoby, they've been so vital to this recent era and the era that everybody regards so fondly and remembers and loves so much because it was finally reaching the mountaintop. OG was not part of that run at the end, but Siakam was like arguably the second best player on that in the finals. You know, he was phenomenal. And so I understand the emotional component to it. I understand the value, you know, pure, you know, cold analytical value of saying in a world where, and I know these are not broadly applicable deals, but like in a world where DeJounte Murray goes for all those picks and where Rudy Gobert goes for all those picks, why should we accept something like what we think is 70 cents on the dollar for OG's value or 65 cents on the dollar for Siakam's value? And so in a vacuum, all of these decisions, whether they're emotional or analytical, you understand the logic to them, but you don't operate in a vacuum. You operate in the context of, as you say, a roster or a league where everybody else's rosters are shifting along all the time too. And if you sort of stand still long enough or stand pat on enough deals, you're just standing still. And so I think that's but would I feel comfortable making, you know, being like, I got to be the one that pulls the trigger on those deals? I don't know. I mean, that's certainly why Masai Ujiri makes the big bucks to do that as opposed to me. But I think it's a tricky spot to be in when you're like, this is the proof of what I do working. I don't really want to just go start doing it again, you know, unless it's a slam dunk value deal.
Yeah. And to, you know, use a weird like housing analogy here, and I am not a handyman at all, but like the easiest thing to do if you buy a house that you're like, ooh, I don't know, this doesn't look all that good. Like we should just bulldoze this thing, just bring the truck in, just take it down to the basement floor and blow it up. I mean, hence that's where it comes from, right? Where he goes, no. There's a strong foundation here. We just need some new windows, you know, some fresh paint, a new roof. Yeah, and that's how I think he operates. He's like, well, hold on. We can still live in this house. You know, I'm sure it's a little drafty over there in that room, but that's okay. We can fix that up. You know, like he looks at it like that way, where he also has the benefit of I can't imagine the Raptors ever like firing Masai Ujiri. I mean, right. I don't know what would have to happen for that to happen. But he is one of these established, like he is just like obviously bringing them their lone championship and just the things he's done. And even like, you know, his stature in the league and what he does overseas. And like, I mean, he is like, I mean, people like basically joke all the time, like they wish he were to run for prime minister in Canada, right? Like I don't know about now with the way they played recently, but the point is like, he can be patient because he's secure and he does not need to panic like some other GMs might in terms of like sort of saving their ass and saving, you know, giving themselves another second chance here because now we got the youth movement and that'll buy me 3 or 4 years. He doesn't really need to worry about that at all, I think. So that's why he's allowed to slow play it, if you want to call it that. And again, I think that just gets frustrating to fans, but it could be the right move. But then again, we could turn around and go, well, man, you could have traded some of these guys and not lost them for nothing. That's the counter, right? It's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't at times.
Well, I'm not damned individually because I'm the host of this show for this week, and so I don't have to do any segments that I don't feel like doing. But right. You're the guest, and so I am going to force you to do something. Masai Ujiri might be a made man, but not on this program. We're elbowing him out of the way. Get out of here, Masai Ujiri. One side, Bobby Webster. New team president of the Toronto Raptors for the purposes of the next couple of minutes, J.E. Skeets. What's one move that hasn't been made or one path that hasn't been taken that you feel like you would pull the trigger on if you were the one at the wheel?
Wow. And this is like, I have to make this deal like in the next week, or am I getting an opportunity to see the team start next season? Or I have to do it in this offseason?
Well, you've got to make it in the next couple of minutes because we're recording a show. But it can be in any context, you know, like we're in a pocket universe here, man. It's like Doctor Strange trapping a demon in the mirror. You can just hang out like as long as you need to. But like, what's the thing that you see as like, I take over? This is the one thing I'm prioritizing.
Okay, well then I am going to be the one trading Siakam. We'll be doing that. We will be calling teams. What's your best deal? This guy could take your team to the next level. I mean, this guy's like the perfect second, if not third. If you're laughing, if he's your third best player, you're winning a championship. He's that good. This guy's 24, 8 and 6 in his sleep. He plays the most minutes in the league. He's strong defensively. We've seen it before in the playoffs. We know he can do it there as sort of a second guy alongside Kawhi. Let's hear it. What's the deal? I mean, all this Damian Lillard talk. Come on. This guy, 30 years old. He's in his prime. He can get you to the promised land. So I would make the move, as queasy as it makes me feel, because he's such a good player, and I just talked about how he's probably underrated. I'm taking some calls for Siakam because I am terrified. I don't want to lose him for nothing. And I think where he is in his career, he could get a decent package back that I can now, with Barnes, with OG, with obviously Grady Dick, and then all these draft picks in theory I'd be getting. Like, I could start putting together a pretty young team. So I guess I'm pulling the plug on Siakam as my number one guy.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, but it's fascinating because I think, again, we talk, the vacuum versus the context of reality. Like, I think top to bottom, Siakam is a better overall player than OG Anunoby is. I think there's more to his game, more creativity.
Absolutely.
But within the context of an NBA team's hierarchy and what sort of role definitions you're asking for out of guys, he's probably a trickier fit to put in than Anunoby would be, because we have the, central casting example. Like, this is your ace 3-and-D wing who is, maybe your third option on offense, but is going to defend the best player in the league. You can trust on him to knock down those catch and shoot shots. We know exactly what role, whether OG wants to play that role for the rest of his career is another question, but and that might be complicating matters, but you kind of, you don't have to, squint too much to know what that is on a title contending team. With Siakam, it's a little bit different because it's almost like he's too good for what a team might want, an acquiring team might want him to be, but not good enough to be what he would want to be on that team. It's sort of a weird in between that he's at a super testament to his development and everything he's put into his game, that he's now, I don't know, he occupies the space of like a mini Giannis or something like that.
Yep.
But if that's not, if you're not, I don't know, Maxi Giannis, that can be a tricky player to fit into an established structure. So, but yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense to me to say, it's not necessarily saying we're not stopping for food because we've got burgers at home with Scotty Barnes versus Siakam, but saying, if you want to put the ball in his hands and you want to give Scotty Barnes the best opportunity and all the reps and all the chances to make that same evolution in his game that Siakam made in his, it's hard to see that happening with Siakam still there.
That's exactly right. And I will say, just to the OG point, and that was well said by you, I think personally, I don't know if it's Raptors fans or maybe it's Masai and Bobby Weston themselves, I feel like this guy, and I am a fan of his, he has become so incredibly overrated to actually what he does. It's sort of blown my mind what's happened over the last couple of years. He's good. He is really, really good. But people talk like OG, like he's Siakam. And you said it. He's not. He's not even close, if I'm being honest. So that's the part. Like, I get it. Nice deal. I mean, it's $18 million a year compared to $37 million for a year for Siakam. I get that. But in terms of the actual player, Siakam is, leaps and bounds better than OG. Maybe OG will get there one day, but I'm sort of doubtful that he takes that sort of evolution and he's winning, most improves and 2-time All-Star and 2-time All-NBA. I don't see it. I really don't. God, I hope I'm wrong. But I just, that part's always fascinating me. But you said it. It's like, just people love the 3-and-D guy. And it's like, oh man, you can plug that guy in anywhere. And that is, that's a obviously a winning player that you can fill out the rest of your roster. He's like the 4th or 5th guy. Holy man, that's great. But I don't see him being like sort of a star guy by any means, which is what we're all looking for in this league. You want the top 20 guys on your roster, as many as you probably can. So, that's just my thought on OG.
I think the interesting thing too, and I know that Jake had reported multiple times, and other people had as well, that OG had bristled at the idea of continuing in that kind of complementary role. And in whatever situation it comes, whether it's in Toronto or elsewhere, he had looked for the idea of ball in my hands, more opportunity to create. I think I've developed that. I think I've earned that. And so the player that brings to mind for me was Jeremy Grant, and where he hit that, it was in that sort of perfect complementary role in Denver on that team that went to the Western Conference Finals in the bubble, gets the opportunity to go to free agency. The money is the same, but the opportunity to go to Detroit and say, I want to find out how good I can be. I want to see how much I can stretch my game and what it looks like when I'm the one, instead of like a 18 usage rate up to like 30, right? I want to see what I look like if I can max out my ability as a player. And that, again, from the player's perspective, makes all the sense in the world to me. Like, of course, nobody dreams of shaking the commissioner's hands so that they can go and be a complimentary wing who, gets to touch the ball 10 times a game, right?
Right.
You think, I want to be the one who takes that shot. And then you go and things go the way they go for Jeremy Grant in Detroit for a couple of years. Oh, great first half of that first year, almost makes an all-star team. And then that's about all.
That's
and
it.
Then it's like, well, actually, maybe I'm better served as a complimentary player on a good team next to a real deal superstar. But you kind of have to go through that and be on that maybe third or fourth team sometimes to figure that out. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if that winds up, whether again, maybe OG doesn't have to go to 3 or 4 teams for that the reconciliation of that to happen. But you wonder just for, if the opportunity needs to sort of come for him to say, all right, clear out everybody. I'm going to go do this. And then, you dribble off your feet a few times and you be the number one guy on a team that can't win very much. And then you go, actually, come to think of it, wasn't such a bad way of life earlier, but you find that out not when you're, 24 or whatever, you find that out a little bit later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's also like OG, he's not in his second or third year here, he's been around for a while. I mean, I think he's entering maybe his 7th season. He's still isn't that crazy? Like, I'm going to check that.
Fast.
1, 2, 3. Yes. He is entering his 7th NBA season. Maybe it doesn't feel that long because half the time he never plays. There is that too. He struggles. He struggles to stay out there.
That's something.
That's what his track history says. So, I feel like I'm now piling on him, but I think that was a perfect example of someone like Grant, where it's like, I want to be that. You understand why they want to be that, but are you that? Are you? Because you can say you want to be that, and you can say, well, it's all reason X and reason Y. I'm not that yet, but I think sometimes you just like Siakam sort of turned into that, and it didn't take going to another team for that to happen. So I'll be fascinated to see how this all works and if Siakam is still there. And I guess those trade rumors have died down, and there's some continuity, I guess we could say, between now OG, Siakam, and Poeltl as their front line. That's another sort of, I guess, reason to be maybe optimistic. It's the backcourt, obviously, with Barnes as sort of the main point guard, and Gary's still there. So hopefully he can hit the threes. It's a good team. That's a good, solid team. It just doesn't, it's not a team that wows anyone. It's like, oh yeah, they're going to be a title contender.
Yeah, just even at the way you lay that out, you're like, that should be a monster defensive starting lineup.
Right.
It's like the all of the length there, all the ability, it's where you're able to have those guys funneling everything on the wing or switching everything on the wing and then funneling them into a legit rim protector in Poeltl. Like, he really did make everything make so much more sense when he got there. And like, as much as blog boys like me fell in love with the idea of Vision 6'9" or whatever, like the idea that everybody is the same size with the same wingspan, doing the same things all the time, being like, oh no, that guy's huge and protects the whole paint. Like, he stretches his arms out and he covers everything.
Yeah.
And is able to backstop all these mistakes. Ideally, yes, you're right, that they should be a monster defensive team. And then it's just going to be a question of whether you can get enough shooting on the other end between whether, whoever that is, whether it's Siakam and OG, if Barnes' shot takes a step forward, Gary Trent Jr., maybe he came back because he knew he was going to be able to take like 15 threes a game.
Yeah.
Because they're going to need somebody to get him up. And Dick in the second unit, and what they can kind of advance from there. But I will let you get out of here on this, because as you mentioned earlier, I don't know that a whole lot of the people south of the Canadian border rather, are watching Raptors games. And as we know, all of us in the national media are jerks, and we are all haters who don't pay attention to the Raptors, and none of us watch ball. We certainly don't know ball, and then we don't watch nearly enough of it. So what is something about this Raptors team, and it can be deep cut, it can be whatever, that none of us are paying attention to that you think is worth keeping an eye on as we head into the next season?
It's a good question. I was going to go with like the obvious, but I've already done it. Siakam is better than a lot of people think, even though I've tried to trade him here in this podcast here.
Remember, in a pocket universe, that didn't even happen. That just doesn't
right.
even... We're not gonna edit it and throw it away, but we're gonna act like it didn't happen from here.
That's right. Out. That's right. But he is really, really good, and I've seen it. Obviously watching a lot of Raptors games. He's done it for a long time. He has a huge workload there, and 24, 8, and 6 is like no joke stats, and obviously again like brings it defensively too. So I just think he really is underrated, probably just in the grand scheme of things from the casuals out there. But I'll go with one other thing, and that is, and I think it's actually an instrumental part to potentially Raptors' success this year. They're young guys, and they're young bigs, specifically in Christian Coloco, and even Precious Achiuwa, if you want to throw him in there, who's at times showed like strong potential, and at other times looks like a borderline basketball player. There's there is some like young talent still like sort of in this squad, and again at the big position. And I think three things need to happen, right? And we've already gone over a couple of them. One, they need to get a defensive identity. They got to be one of the best defensive teams in the league to win a lot of these games. Okay. Two, Barnes has to like impress as a point guard and can't be overwhelmed. I think on both sides of the ball, defensively trying to stick with some of these athletic super point guards in the league, and then being the table setter and being a little more aggressive with his shot because he loves to pass. And again, that's like the Ben Simmons qualities are there. It's like,
right,
you got to look for yours a little bit more. You got to put pressure on the rim, get to line, stuff like that. And then the third thing is to come back to this, to answering this question is like one, if not two of these young guys on the Raptors got to pop. The first one, the obvious one would be like Grady Dick. Like if he's like, obviously can add some shooting to this team that was 28th in 3-point percentage and 3-point makes, like him and Gary Trent Jr., if they're both really good 3-point shooters, okay, now there's something there. So Grady Dick or Koloko and or sort of Precious Achiuwa. I think those guys as contributors off the bench would be huge, especially in terms of defensive identity as well. Like those guys are both athletes. So those three things, and that's like sort of my answer to your thing there. It's like there's some they were a bad team. They were an average team, but there's some promising, I think, talent there, and especially Koloko at his age. And I still even think Darko might be able to unlock Precious. We saw what Darko did with like sort of rim protecting big guys in Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams, even to some extent. Like I'm excited to see what he can do with Pirtle, and then also like Precious and Koloko there. Like he's got a nice resume there when it comes to sort of like helping out these bigs defensively and even on the other end. So that's what I'll go with my answer.
Yeah, if Achiuwa can, I mean, and we've seen flashes, in that playoff series against the Sixers. There were times where it's like, holy hell, what is this? Like, did he just like unlock a whole new part of his game? And I don't think there will be a lot of like face-up dribble driving from him, ideally, as what you would go there. But if he is something like their version of Brandon Clark, right, where it's like undersized 5, but athletic out the wazoo, to jump out of the gym, defend all across all 5 positions, and be that like spell partner for your bigs, or whether it's you have him as a small ball 5 or you have him playing with your true 5, like it unlocks a lot. And then it's also could go to one of the big differences, I think the hoped for difference in moving from Nick Nurse to Darko Rajakovic is that idea of whether it was because Nurse didn't like the ingredients in the cupboard or they never put good ones in there, or some combination of both. Like the reason that Siakam and Fred VanVleet kept leading the league in minutes was like he just played his starters a ton.
Yeah.
And so it's the question, and it was a chicken or the egg kind of question. Maybe I'm getting too much into the kitchen metaphors, but the idea of if you can find a bench, you got to find a second unit that is going to be reliable enough to play and that the coach can trust. And so is that an area where Darko can kind of succeed where Nick Nurse sometimes struggled? And then, would that then reduce the overall workload on your starters, maybe leave them a little bit fresher, have them a little bit more in the tank, increase their efficiency a little bit? I think would go a long way toward, as you said, like finding sort of the untapped potential. Where's the low hanging fruit on this roster? And I think those would be great places to look for it for sure.
Yeah, that's the hope at least. So we'll see. I can't say like I'm going in with low expectations. Let me put it that way. But hopefully I will be pleasantly surprised by this Raptors team under new head coach Darko and maybe with Scotty Barnes as sort of the nominal point guard.
Well, Skeets, that's what I try to deliver here when I'm stepping into the hosting chair. Low expectation, over deliver. Under promise, over deliver in the chair.
That's right. That's what I've been doing for like 18 years. And it sort of works. So that's the move. You've killed it though. You've dominated this one.
Oh, stop it. All right. Well, on that compliment, I'm going to get us out of here. That's going to do it for this episode of No Cap Room. Thanks so much to John Gennaro for doing all the things that he does to make this show look and sound great. Thank you so much to J.E. Skeets of the phenomenal No Dunks podcast. You can find it on the Athletic Podcast Network. You can find it wherever you are getting this podcast as well. YouTube, everywhere. Hit them up, subscribe to them. It is, again, the gold standard of NBA podcasting and has been for the entire time I've been doing anything with the basketball internet. So can't say enough good things about them, but I'm going to keep trying. back to the idea of what we do at our podcast. Subscribe to the Ball Don't Lie podcast on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you are currently listening on. Leave us a 5-star review. Let everybody know that I did such a great job and Jake gets to stay on vacation forever. Vinny Goodwill will be back here again next week with another episode of Good Word with Goodwill. And then we'll be back the week after that. Again, me in the big chair. So you got to come up. You got to turn up for your boy. And we thank you so much for listening. We thank you for everything that you do for us. And we'd appreciate it if you would come back again next week for another episode of No Cap Room.